privilege to have Valerie today. So I just really want to welcome you all. There's going to be a lot of talking, a lot of chatting, a lot of sharing, a lot of questioning. Valerie has indicated that she really, really likes a question or two for guidance, because that will help her say what she'll be interested in. I've asked Valerie to actually introduce herself, and so perhaps as a kind of a order for the day, I'm going to hand you over to Valerie, and then Lucille is going to give you a quick tech briefing, so you know how to raise your hand electronically and to mute yourself when there's screeching in the background. So maybe Valerie, you can start, and is this the right order, Lucille? Should we start with Valerie? Maybe.
Can I wait? Can I wait to introduce myself? Can we do the tech, and then I'll kind of go in a little bit out of order here?
I'm cool with that. Lucille,
okay,
give us a tech briefing.
Absolutely, and I'm kind of trying to also let people in and send people with missing links their links.
What can I do?
But I'll do that in a second. So thank you, and I'm with Julia. This is the most beautiful thing that I have seen in a long, long time. So it's so beautiful and amazing to have all of these people that I actually love and adore, and that we love and adore in this room. But I'm here to speak about tech, not to weep online. So very briefly, a couple of things. If you find that you're struggling to hear, it might be a suggestion to just first try it by switching off your video. Sometimes that does all that's needed. And it will preserve your bandwidth a bit. But those of you that can keep your video on, it's lovely to have it on because it's wonderful to, and I know for Valerie, not to be speaking to a black screen. Second thing would be that if you're not asking questions, to please keep your screen on mute, because otherwise all the noises that you make on your side is going to interfere with the rest of us hearing Valerie. There are two ways in which you can indicate that three ways you can ask a question. The first is in the chat box. So we'll be keeping an eye on the chat box and putting those questions through to Valerie. So if it's not an opportune moment to ask a question, that's number one. The second one would be that there is a raise hand function. That those of you that have up-to-date versions can raise your hand. If you're on an Apple Mac, that's also the Option Y or the Control Y key. Oh, is it Alt Y? I don't know, something with Y. But if you don't have an up-to-date version, then that raising hand won't work. And yeah, there we've already got some thumbs up happening. And then we have also, we want to ask your permission to record the session so that we can share it with you afterwards, so that if any of you have bandwidth issues or drop off, that we can share it, and we'll share it within this close circle of people who are here today. I think that's most of the tech things. We are a big group. It's wonderful. Last thing, those of you that are unfamiliar with Zoom, in the top right-hand corner, you can toggle between speaker view and gallery view. So speaker view will allow, for example, mostly when Valerie's presenting and sharing her ideas, her face to be on the screen. And those of you that would love to see the full array of who we are here, there's more than just one page. You'll have to scroll between them, but you can keep yourself in gallery view, but you can toggle between those views as we go along. Okay, brilliant. I think that's everything that needs saying.
Yeah, I just got a note from Patricia Faison, and I think there's quite a few that didn't see the link, and anyway, they're coming in now.
Okay, wonderful.
So then we actually, wow, we're at full complement. Almost, sure. So, thank you, Lucille, for giving us a tech brief, and welcome to all the people that just joined us. And now for you, Valerie, an introduction. Who are you?
You keep wanting me to introduce myself, and I keep wanting to delay that. So I'm going to delay that just a little bit further. If you will bear with me, I will tell you who I am as best I know myself to be at this moment. But I actually would love to have a moment of grounding and coming into this space, if you all don't mind. I know that we are coming in from many different places, many different times of day. So some of you may be, I'm grateful for those of you who I know it's already evening and I'm interrupting your dinner and your family time and all of that. Thank you for being here. I heard someone would be on here from New Zealand, and that is the wee hours of morning, my goodness. So thank you for thinking that. Okay, maybe she decided to sleep in, and I totally get that. For me, it's morning. But let's just take a moment to come into this space, into this Zoom room, into this collective of individuals here together, because whatever is outside of this space will still be waiting for us when we leave here in a couple of hours. So I will ask you to just maybe soften your gaze or close your eyes a bit and take a few grounding breaths. And I'd like for you to think about what your purpose is, what brings you here to this space, to be with us, to come to know ourselves more fully. And what is your intention for our time together? Thank you. I think I do that because I need that grounding more than probably anyone else in this room. I'm so excited to be here with all of you, and I'm grateful for Julia and Lucille and Simon for inviting me to come join you and to talk about Fallback. And I'm blown away that so many people are so interested. I'm always awed and humbled by that, so thank you. And I'd love to get to know you, and there are 40 of us on here, and so we could spend our entire 2 hours doing introductions. So I'd like to propose an alternative, which would be for you to introduce yourself in the chat in just a couple of words, your name, where you are arriving from, and how you are arriving here. So if you could just do that, and then I can at least get a sense of who you are. And I promise I will tell you at some point who I am. Those are great. Thank you, Julia. I'm excited too. Michelle as well. Yeah. Thanks, Ron. I'm interested in the reactions and defenses too. I love that, Lucille. Heartful. I hope I'm able to offer some insights in. Yeah, and there's a strange new world. I'd love to see this focus, Liesl, on learning about self in this too, and what we can offer to our clients, to our students.
Such beautiful messages.
Right? Babette, my mom's name is Babette. We don't have many. We don't come across many Babettes. Welcome. Oh, emotional flashbacks. Okay, fascinating. Excellent. Thank you all. Thank you for your introductions. I'm still not going to introduce me. It will come. But I'm going to ask you to do something else before we start. I'd like to ask you to take a few minutes, and you might want to grab a piece of paper and a pen, or if you want to, after we get to this point, past this introductory part of what I'm going to ask you to do, even pull up a Word document if typing is a better way for you to do kind of a free write reflection. I'd like to ask you to think back over the weeks between now and when our worlds turned topsy-turvy, the reality of normal life, normal as we knew it, began to change as a result of the pandemic. And play back the video reel of what happened during that time, paying special attention to yourself on the screen. Now, as you watch the playback, I want you to identify a specific moment of fallback. Lucille, if you don't mind putting up the questions, that would be helpful so people can kind of follow along with the prompts. And these will be up for the time that I'm asking you to reflect on this and to write about this. So that will be forthcoming. A moment of fallback, a moment when you felt your capacity shrinking, your options for showing up limited, your normal capacities gone. Perhaps it was an experience of feeling out of sync with yourself. Perhaps it was an experience of feeling out of sync with those around you. Maybe it felt like a departure from who you wish to be seen as, or out of alignment with who you wish to be. And from this detached viewer perspective, watching you on this screen, how would you describe yourself in that moment? What was alive for you? What were you doing? What thoughts were going through your mind? What did that feel like? So let's take about 5 minutes just to do, I don't know if you're familiar with free write. This is the easiest way for me to get into this space, so I'll just describe it briefly. Using these questions as a prompt, just stream of consciousness. I'm not going to ask you to turn this in. No one else is going to look at this. It's just for you. What flows from your mind through your fingers as you think about these questions? Don't worry about grammar or spelling or anything like that. It doesn't need to make sense. It's just what is coming through you. So let's take 5 minutes to reflect on these questions. That'd be great. Lucille, if you don't mind bringing our faces back on the screen. Thank you. Whew. Gosh, doing that exploration of self can be incredibly hard, revealing, painful. And I invited you to do that for two reasons. One, because I think that these theories that we study as researchers, as academics, as coaches, are helpful to learn as concepts that are out there. But the real power of them lies in our ability to make sense of our own lives and ourselves through them. And I think they offer a beautiful opportunity to do that. And maybe we get stuck in that out there space. The second reason is because I think until we are willing and able to do that exploration within ourselves, we are hampered in our ability to accompany other people in their journey of discovery of the fullness of themselves, particularly around fallback, which often feels like those parts of self that we really don't want anybody to know about, that we don't want to acknowledge ourselves. So thank you for going along with me. You don't have to, no one has to share, but is there anybody who would like to share what came up for them during that self-reflection? Yeah, Lucille. And I can only see one screen of the two I think we have right now. So please, if someone else can help wrangle anyone raising their hand, that'd be great. Lucille, please.
Maybe an invitation if you want to share, just type in the box. I'm happy to share. So I'll just, part of what I wrote here is, I'm so deep in this that I'm out of it. I have no horizon here and now is overwhelming, but the door to my options is closed. Has closed properly. It's shut and locked.
Thank you, Lucille.
And as part of that, just I had this sense of like just a shrinking horizon. It's almost like feeling the world grow smaller around me, like a literal retraction into a space. And the specific example that I was calling up felt quite dangerous, actually, like for the self in some way, but just the sense of the world becoming smaller, and almost in that moment looking down, realizing that I don't realize that the world's so small because it feels so intense and, like a little closed circuit in some way. I don't know if that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense.
Sorry, Ron's also happy to share, as is Margaret and Patricia Lees.
Okay, it's not Ron, it's Margaret, his wife. So I was just having a personal training session with my son, and I hurt myself falling off a big ball, a Pilates ball, and I went into, I've cracked my ribs. I went into a real sort of, and then I started to say, I'm sorry, and it's funny, it's something I do when I hurt myself. I apologize, and I've never really reflected on that. Why do I apologize? And then it was difficult because he's my son and I didn't want him to make him feel bad. So it was sort of, I'm scared, I'm hurting, and I need to protect Josh, and I'm sorry. And that all happened. Yeah, so that's my example.
Thank you, Margaret.
And Patricia Lees.
Thanks. I thought I was just going to share on the chat box, but I'm also okay to to share audibly. I just had a moment where I had to do something online, and I just felt completely and totally unprepared for it. And I just felt myself going into this really restricted place of panic and showing up very restricted on the call and feeling quite judgmental of myself and other people. And then at the end of the call, just like going into that place of self-criticism and just really feeling like I hadn't shown up in the way that I wanted to show up. So for me, that was a very specific and visceral experience of fallback.
Thank you, Patricia.
I'm happy to share as well. I find that I almost go back to childhood experiences and act them out. I'm so disempowered from them, and it can go on for so long, and I just repeat old stuff, and I know I'm in there, but I can't get out, and I feel so angry and frustrated that I don't have more skills, and and then it often can land up with me just shouting because I'm so angry that I can't resolve this.
Thank you, Julia. Looks like Heidi posted in the chat box a sense of speeding up, deep anxiety for the health and safety of those close to me who are vulnerable. Notice myself becoming bossy, micromanaging, and very fast and highly interventionist. Boy, that sounds very familiar.
Yeah, so
Son. Yes, Heidi. Heidi, you want to elaborate?
yeah, I think just in catching myself in the act, especially with a number of people in my immediate circumstances who are very vulnerable, I just noticed that I assumed that I knew what they wanted, what they needed, didn't ask, just jumped in, went into complete overdrive, and I just took over. Yeah, and it was just this incredibly controlling and micromanaging, and just going at a speed of kind of leaving people in my dust. Yeah, which just made me afterwards think, it's like, how arrogant are you? Just like slow down.
There is a sense of grasping for control when control is ever more elusive, and a sense of urgency when we don't know how long this is going to last. And that's the lack of control too. I am so grateful to you all for going there in your own exploration of self, and for your willingness to share with all of us. Thank you.
Simon, did you want to go still? Or?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I can. Yeah, I'll be quick.
No need to be quick.
So the analogy is of a dark dream, but the irony is that it's not a dream. It's only when I'm awake that I'm feeling this. And there was one night when I was lying awake in the middle of the night, and the word I came up with was paralysis. And then I love this free writing thing, and it was a divorce from my ongoing pseudo relationship with omnipotence. I'm not sure where that came from, but I discover is utterly fake. Utterly fake. I could not sleep for fear of the implications of the dark dream.
But the dark dream happened when you were awake.
Always. I don't actually. I sleep. When I sleep, I don't have dark dreams. I don't think. So it's kind of ironic.
I love free writing for the same reason. One, I think I'm incredibly profound when I free write. Like, where did this come from? Oh my gosh, I had no idea that this was in my head. And it just does connect you to things that you just didn't know were even going on up there. The sense making is really helpful. Anybody else who would like to share? Ron.
Let's see if we can do this. No, we can't.
We can hear you, Ron.
Oh, I'm madly trying to raise a hand. What was it? Option 9? That didn't seem to work. Come on.
Why? Option
Why? Okay. Yeah, I volunteered to give an online webinar last week, which I didn't really know how to do. And I said yes to a client on Tuesday and had to deliver it on Friday, and madly had to get my head around it. Went into sort of overwhelm and ended up in quite a stuck place. And Margaret, bless her, said, for God's sake, do a little bit of yoga and breathe. So I'm sorry, it's not quite fallback. It's fallback and recovery. And it's amazing the difference actually it made to breathe and engage my body and to shift my state. But I sort of fell and got back up again.
That's awesome. I love those stories too. In fact, in my research, fallback can't be fallback without spring forward. So it may not be that quick. In fact, it's often not, but it's beautiful when it happens. And I think those reminders by self, by others around us to do those things, to put in place those scaffolds, to use the tools that we know work for us are so important, because when we are in that space, when we are locked behind a door, and we don't often remember those tools that will help us get back. It's that we've lost the capacity to access them. Anybody else?
So I'll go. Yeah, it was a moment when I saw a video clip, apparently from BBC, someone from Goldman Sachs. He's like a financial guy or something. The words escape me now. Speaking about how this pandemic is going to erode any, savings that people have put away, investments, anything with a currency. And, the euro is going to come to nil and all of these. So, and in that moment, I was just in despair, in utter despair. I mean, I remember being completely freaked out. And that night, I had a nightmare that I had to sleep in the open field with a piece of duvet, by way of a little mattress. And, it was in the open field, nothing to protect me from the elements. So, yeah, that was quite an eminent one for me. Stuck out.
It's interesting to hear the themes of the subconscious and the conscious mind dancing together as we try actively, focusedly to make sense of our fallbacks, our meaning making, and that as our subconscious continues to try to process that. Yeah, I see Sharon with her hand raised.
Hi. So I was in my usual, let's just plan this and it'll all be okay. And then I got hooked into Facebook, and I found myself completely frenzied and made a decision there and then to get off Facebook. That was 5 weeks ago, and I haven't gone back onto Facebook because the triggers coming from Facebook were just that one day after we had our announcement here, and we had 4 days grace to prepare ourselves for lockdown. The Monday after the announcement it felt like a frenzy. And I know that social media fed that. and so I've been quite happy without it. Quite peaceful actually without it.
You had a lot more time, right?
Oh yeah, at least 90 minutes a day to claw back and do something else.
Like breathe and do yoga.
Exactly, yes.
Okay. Okay, I'm so grateful for your willingness to share. It's super helpful, I think, for all of us to hear the different ways that fallback shows up in each of us. It's helpful for me to understand that. And in accessing it in ourselves, we can also have more compassion for other people, knowing that they are probably in this lockdown, shrinking, smaller space, often too, not showing up with their fullest capacities. I'm going to introduce myself now. Yes, Julia. I can't hear you though.
Oh, that's the problem. Thank you, Lucille. It's the Ubermensch in charge of the, I should have
Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. Boosie's Wi-Fi is shocking, and we know this now because we've had chats to her for a while. And so she's asked me to read this.
Okay.
Recently, with COVID lockdown, when the decision to call back employees to work was confirmed, I was conflicted, felt incompetent, and wished to withdraw from the decision-making team. I felt helpless. I could not protect co-workers. I personally have options to work from home, but planning for the team to go back on site was terrifying. Thank you, Boosie.
Thank you. I feel that in my bones. I feel so much of what you all have shared in my bones. You know, these experiences of fear and contraction and grasping for control, which we tend to do when our basic needs are, you know, go back to the original developmentalist Maslow, you know, our basic needs are not being tended to. How can we possibly get any higher up in the pyramid? So I am here after having been kind of what I call in a cocoon for a period of time, as I figured out who I was in the world, who I was in my own self, who I was in my family, and took some time to shed all of the pieces of my identity that really fed my ego, particularly around my professional self. And it's something that I learned. I appreciated Julia's reference to childhood. It's something I learned in childhood around this is what I do to get loved, achieving, producing, contributing. And it had really served me well in my life up to a certain point until it didn't anymore. And so I actually, unlike Sharon, I had been off of Facebook for a period of time and got back on 5 weeks ago. And I miss being off of it. But it coincided with me coming back into the world sooner than I intended to come back into the world because of COVID-19. Because I was asked to come and speak about my research on fallback by someone who said, you know, you have some knowledge and research that might be a little bit helpful for people in the world, and maybe you should come on out. And I thought, maybe I should, and I'm not ready, which was also its own bit of fallback that I've been kind of wrestling through. But that necessitated a need to be more public and on social media, which I have a stronger hate relationship with than love, but I recognize the necessity of it. So all of those things, the achieving, contributing, all of that, what that looked like for me in my early career was a career in the nonprofit world, in healthcare, and then in higher ed, and then I fell into a leadership program at the University of San Diego. So where I'm coming from is San Diego, California, in the United States. And how I'm arriving is super excited to be here, humbled by the willingness of you all, brave souls, to share with me your experience of Fallback and for us to all learn together. But I was in a graduate program at the University of San Diego, which turned into a second graduate program at the University of San Diego, through which I studied leadership, and I have a love for theory, and I particularly have a love for developmental theory. But more important than that, I have a love for discovering myself through these series, and of discovering others, like a truer, more authentic version of others that is filled with more compassion for the struggle of just being human. And so in my doctoral program at the University of San Diego, I was fortunate to take a class very early on in adult development. And I came to learn about these theories that you're familiar with, and was more enchanted by Torbert's theories because of their implications for organizations, the fact that he has done so much related to leadership. And what that looks like in organizations. And then I had the great fortune of him coming as a visiting professor and offering an action research methods course. And I was one of 6 students in that course. And so I spent the summer challenging him on all things in his theory, including why he keeps changing all the damn names, because no one can keep up. And I'm going to have to write a lit review at some point about this, and to track through all of that is a little bit daunting. But I was originally looking out there at the developmental theories, and then it became clear that I really needed to look in here and to start exploring my own life and development. And I could see how my development had tracked well throughout my life according to these theories. And it was gratifying for me to see myself moving along this spectrum, and for me to think about what might come next. And then I thought about all of the ways that I did not show up aligned with my capacities, what the developmental theory would say my biggest capacities were, and I could not find that in the literature. And I decided I needed to figure out if I was an anomaly in this space, or if, other people were actually experiencing what I've come to term fallback too. And so that's how I came to study fallback. And I undertook my research with 6 key thinkers in the fields of adult development and leadership development. It was a theoretical research study. The original person who had actually found empirical evidence of fallback was David McCallum. And he was not looking for that. The term, I think Lucille said, scaffolds, was beautiful language. That is David's language, so I can't take credit for that. He was actually studying the adaptive self-scaffolds that people use to support themselves in times of anxiety and conflict. And he happened to find in all 18 participants, no matter where they were on the developmental spectrum, that every one of them experienced fallback. So his were the shoulders upon which I stood. And when I launched my own research, which I had the good fortune of conducting with Bill Torbert and Bob Keegan and Suzanne Cooke-Greuter, Jennifer Garvey-Berger. David was one of my key thinkers. So my participants were key thinkers, and Chuck Pallas to talk about fallback in the context of development and the context of leadership, and to situate the phenomenon. My goal there, and this is a tendency of mine, but also in fallback, so I appreciate that other people may be experiencing some of this, was to tidy up this theory. There are some loose edges, like some frayed pieces of the theory, developmental theory out there. I'm going to go in, I'm going to tidy this up, and as I'm going to tie it up with a bow, it's all going to look great. And I completely unraveled it further, had more questions. I thought I'd have a theory of fallback. I have no theory of fallback. I have a whole bunch more questions about fallback. And I came to be more comfortable with that. With the fact that I didn't have, that became the gift, that there was so much more out there to learn. I left my doctoral studies and took a full-time teaching role in a graduate program in organizational leadership. And I was there for several years when I had this epiphany about I'm not showing up well to much of my life, and I think that what I might think I've been about all this time is really untrue and inauthentic, and I need to spend some time figuring out who I am and who I want to be in the world, and just practicing being. And I fully, after like 6 months of really struggling against my natural inclination to do and to plan, I'd finally settled into this space, and then COVID-19 happened. And I am here with you. So I mentioned David's research on fallback as kind of the initial research. He called it temporary regression. And then there's been another person, Ashley Wells, who has done, was out of the University of Georgia. David did his research through Columbia University. Ashley's research was actually specifically on fallback in leaders. And so I'll share some of her research as we go along. And then, we have our own Julia here, who is doing her research on leadership stuckness, which seems to have some ties to fallback as well. And maybe some others who have researched in this space. I actually don't know a lot of others who have specifically explored fallback. So I'm always super grateful for the opportunity to explore it with others. And I've been in the process in the past. I will say I've been in the process for 7 years, but I actually think I was making a whole bunch of excuses. Some are valid and some not so much. So I've really been in the process of writing my book in the past year on fallback. And what I realized is that I didn't really want to talk about what the theorist had to say, although that's super important, but I really wanted to access from a lived experience perspective. And because I think that's where it makes most sense. So that's who I am today. And I'm still trying to figure it out. But let's talk about fallback. So, and let's talk a little bit about development. Let's do a little developmental framing. So one way to think about development is to think about that you have this house that you live in, and you have these rooms in the house. And originally, early on, you have, say, a bedroom and a bathroom and a living room and a kitchen, and you're pretty comfortable in that space. It serves your needs. You're, doing fine. Everything's functional. It works. And one day you come across this door in your house that you've never noticed before. And so you got to open the door, and it's locked. You can't get into the door. And so you kind of push a little bit harder and still not budging. And you happen to come across some keys in a junk drawer, and you try all 31 of them, and finally you get one to work. But even after you can unlock the lock, you're kind of pushing, and something's stuck there, something's pushing up against it. So you give it an elbow and shoulder, put some weight into it, and nope, still not opening. And you think, you know what, screw this. I don't need to get in that room anyway. I've got my kitchen, my bathroom, my bedroom, my living room. I am set. I am super comfortable in this space. I'm just going to sit here. And then curiosity gets the better of you, and so you go back. And you push on that door a little bit harder, and you're able to crack it open a little bit, and you peek inside, and oh my gosh, what a discovery. Like, this room has different colors, different functionality, different tools that you didn't even know that you needed. And so now you're putting your full weight into it. You bust open that door, and you start looking around the room and taking in the furniture and the style, and thinking, wow, I am enchanted with this room. It is amazing. And so then you walk over to the window in the room, and you look out that window, and you see things that you never knew existed, because all of the other windows pointed to another side of the house. And out this window, you see a tree that is blooming in the spring. And you see a patch of dead grass, because the sprinklers clearly are not reaching that area. There's a whole park over to this side of the house. Oh my gosh, what a discovery. It is just, you're filled up with joy about, I have this new space, how amazing. And then you turn around and you look back from the room you've just discovered into the other rooms of your house, and you see in those other rooms, the couch, maybe the first couch that you bought yourself that was not a hand-me-down from someone else. And you notice for the first time that that's become a little bit threadbare. And you see the chair that you love to snuggle up in and read and just be in. And that brings you so much solace, and you feel comforted by that. And so now from this room, you're able to have this perspective on other rooms in your house that you had not been able to have before. And you have this whole new room to discover. And so goes it with development. We are able to open more and more doors to the rooms in our developmental house that give us more options, more capacity to see what's happening inside of us, to make sense of what's happening inside of us, to see things that we couldn't see outside of us, to see earlier parts of us in different ways. So this is what happens in one's developmental house. So when Lucille was kind of referring to the rooms and all of that, that completely resonated with me when she was sharing after our reflection. Now what happens in Fallback is you had access to all of these rooms. And one day you go to open that door to the room, this room that you discovered maybe even 6 years ago, 10 years ago, and that door is locked. You're probably clawing at the door at this point because you're in Fallback. You can't, you're grasping for options. You know they exist. You know exactly what you need is behind that door, and you can't get in there. You can't get to the take a breath. You can't get to the yoga. You are grasping to get into that door, and you can't. And so for a period of time, your all access pass to your developmental house has been suspended. And that period of time may be minutes, it may be weeks, it may be years. And I have to give credit to Jennifer Garvey-Berger, who is one of my key thinkers in my research, for even for sparking this idea. She described Fallback in that way, the rooms to the house being locked. And so from that, I was inspired by, well, if those rooms are locked now, how do we get in there to begin with? So I want to give her credit for inspiring the developmental house overall analogy. But that is what Fallback is about, that the center of gravity, our center of gravity is when we have access to every room in our house that we know of yet at this point, right? There may be more rooms to be discovered, but what we know now. But when we are in Fallback, we aren't able to access all rooms, to all of the developmental rooms to our house. And so we have a loss of the capacities that hold behind those doors. So Fallback is, I think Ron asked earlier, and then kind of with the questioning and further description of the prompt for the free writing came into it, but Fallback is a complete loss of options, of capacity, of access to feel, to think, to behave at the developmental level which we are ideally capable. And we might think about this as our small self, a departure from our big self. And another thing that we talked before about, one of the criteria for fallback is that you must be able to spring forward at least to where you were developmentally before, maybe even grow further along because of your fallback and how you were able to deal with that. Another criteria is that it's unconscious. I mean, we all know that we can choose to operate, to think, to behave from a earlier developmental capacity when we're driving, when we're going to the post office to do a transaction, when we are talking to our children and that's what they need. But this is an unconscious, uncontrollable loss of options. Okay. That was a whole bunch. So let me take a moment and see if there are any questions here. I see there's something in the chat I have not looked yet, and I'm going to let Julia moderate that if you don't mind. Or raise your hand if you have any other questions at this point.
Audrey was suggesting a link with Robert Fritz and Bob Anderson.
I do not know Robert Fritz, but I do know Bob Anderson.
Okay. Maybe Audrey tune us up on that. Where oh, there you are. Yeah.
And who speaks about dimensions to ourselves. And on the creative side, leaders are more driven by purpose and vision and passion. And on our reactive side, we are more driven by the need for safety. He speaks of there is something along the lines of there's no safety in the things that we are passionate about and when we are driving towards a state of purpose. And behind all of this are, different stages of evolution. And leaders can go up those stages, but there are times when we regress, whenever we are faced with grief or trauma or whatever the case might be.
Yeah, thank you for that, Audrey. The reactive side of so Bob Anderson has the leadership circle profile that many of you may be familiar with. And as Audrey described, there's a creative side and then the reactive side. And the reactive, I can see that there would be, we show up in our reactive side. I think that people do have go-to fallback triggers. I think there are some that shock the hell out of us, like, whoa, where did that come from? But I think, we tend to have the same ones that we go to often. And so I think those would probably show up in the reactive side of the leadership circle profile. So I think that's a really important connection. And I think what you're saying about grief and trauma, that resonates with me as connected to some of the overall triggers and the safety needs, the certainty needs, that kind of thing, the overarching triggers of fallback. So absolutely, and I will talk about those a little bit. So thank you. Those are great connections, Audrey. Thank you.
Margaret asks, how does fallback differ from triggered or regression? Why do we need a new word?
Yeah. So I do not use regression because I do not have a psychology background, and it feels very connected to our psychological state, and I'm just not equipped to go there. In the exploration that I have done around fallback and regression, which has been minimal, regression feels more permanent. And even though there is recovery from regression, but it feels like a longer term than fallback, which could be as fleeting as moments. And two, could be longer term where you think, am I ever going to come out of this? I've been in that space before. From a triggering perspective, I think I use triggers as what gets us into fallback. And the 5 overarching triggers of fallback. these are the things that throw us back, that kind of make us sink into our wormhole or our onion hole, or they're the things that precipitate fallback. Whereas fallback itself is that place that you go to in your meaning making, in your sense of self in the world, once you are triggered.
Great. We've got a question from Sav. Please let me know if I'm moving through these too quickly. I will easily change my pace. So Sav says, how does fallback relate to ACES and internal family systems and transgenerational trauma?
ACEs, early childhood.
Oh, ACEs.
Yes.
Thanks, Sav. I should have got you to read it.
Sam, can you tell me, you were just about to say what ACEs stands for?
Adverse childhood experiences.
Oh.
Okay, thank you. I'm fascinated by the family system stuff, and I will tell you I'm not terribly familiar with it. I'm just, especially not the theory part of it. What I can tell you from my own experience, but that even your description, you're naming what that is, the childhood trauma, that seems connected to one of the overarching triggers of fallback, which is unresolved trauma, this encapsulation of an earlier experience that doesn't get resolved at that point in our development, that at some point that it just kind of gets bracketed off. So something, I'm going to go ahead, we won't talk about this one in depth later because I'll talk about it now, but one of the overarching triggers of fallback is this unresolved trauma. So we have this experience that feels like trauma at an earlier part in our development, and because we are not psychologically, don't have the capacity to address it and resolve it then, we have that, it gets bracketed off, and the rest of us grows along developmentally except that one piece. And whenever we encounter someone or something that reminds us of that, we get triggered into that smaller space of when it first happened, that earlier meaning making space. Now, the idea is that as you continue to grow developmentally, you'll have the tools that you can use to go back and resolve that. And I think that may happen. I can tell you that there are things in my own childhood that are still triggers for fallback for me that I have not been able to resolve. I think this is like a sticky wicket, you know, one of those that's super hard to get into. And I'm not sure if this is what you're referring to, but this is something I'm super interested in is when you say intergenerational, I think about cellular trauma that actually goes, you know, like it's not even in my mom's lifetime, maybe not even my grandma's, but what came before that carries on within our cells. And if we don't even know that that's there, like a fear of famine, for instance, you know, like, well, I know that we didn't have fear of famine in my lifetime or my mom's lifetime. And where did that come from? So how do we even start to unearth that so that we can resolve it? So I think that those unresolved trauma pieces are really powerful triggers for fallback and powerful triggers for us to attempt to resolve. Does that answer your question, Sab?
Yeah, it does, particularly what Heidi shared about that going into the command and control, the micromanaging. It's like, I think a lot of us can relate to a part within us that suddenly wants to take over and be the commander and the controller. And then there's a little one that you spoke about that is actually very fearful and actually just wants to be nurtured and has, you know, needs a different kind of approach. But it's almost like some of the internal family system parts or archetypes overrule or come to the fore stronger at times like this. But it almost seems like there's a transgenerational aspect that certain of those internal family system let's say role players aren't our own even.
They almost are overlapping from other systems, from our parent systems or our generational influences somewhere. I would even go so far as to say past lives. But they come in and there's an influence then, and there's quite a lot that's being triggered at this moment. So I was just wondering if you had done any studies around that, and particularly on the ACEs study, because if your score is high, and I don't know how many people know about ACEs, but there's a higher predisposition to falling back into a post-traumatic stress type behavior if you've got a high ACEs score. So that's, I mean, anyone who's had really hectic trauma growing up can relate to triggers that make you feel like you're back in those moments and reliving childhood memories. So thank you for answering. And I see somebody put Gabor Mate. I actually spoke to Julia about it the other day, and he also talks about that. Yeah, so I was just wondering if it's come up in your studies and what your thoughts were.
It has not come up in my studies, and I'm super fascinated by it. And because, I mean, social scientists tend to study what it confounds them most. Like I wanted to know why no one else was talking about fallback, which it turns out, by the way, they were. It just, you really have to dig down into the theory to see where they reference fallback at all. But I wanted to know, because I saw, why am I the only one falling back? Why isn't anyone talking about this? Like, we study what confounds us most in ourselves. And so this family systems therapy, as someone who comes from, we all do, our dysfunctional families, I am so fascinated by how this can be resolved without me even being in the same room as the people who are the players in the story. So I think it's a fascinating connection that I do want to learn more about. So thank you for the resources too.
Yeah, there's just something here as well about PTSD and complex PTSD, like sort of if you have experiences of PTSD early on in life, your chances of having them again later are higher. And you're more likely to turn an incident into PTSD if you've had, your chances for processing the trauma are reduced. And I just think that also can relate to this fallback idea that if you have this wellspring of PTSD that can be triggered and presented in leadership behaviors, and just hats off, I see Wendell is here, hats off to Wendell from Anglo Gold, because they've long understood how this, we've spoken to them a lot about, a lot of people in our country have come through war. They've got PTSD, huge crime. 1 in 3 women are sexually abused, 1 in 5. And all of these things under stress trigger into trauma-based PTSD at work or leadership fallback. Just a thought.
Thank you for sharing that. I was talking to a friend who is a coach the other day, and he was in the Marines, the Marine Corps in the US for 25 years, and he has been on many, many deployments. And he said there was a time when he was in Iraq, and their base abutted the Iraqi army base. And he, in the beginning, would go out, they would stay on their base, but he would go out for a run, just like any of us would. We put on our shorts and our shirt and go out for a run, and you get the most distance if you ran the perimeter, and a portion of that perimeter went up against the Iraqi army base. And he realized that when he was over there on that side, he felt completely disarmed. So he started running with a weapon. And so just like we would suit up with our iPod and our water and our shorts, he would grab his gun, and that was like how he went for a run. And we were talking about now how when he goes anywhere outside of his house in the context of this pandemic, he feels disarmed. unless he goes out with his mask and his gloves and his sanitizer and the constant checks. Do I have everything? And this is completely bringing up the trauma that he experienced from a lack of safety from one of his deployments. And he's talked to his family about this, like, you all must be experiencing this too. And in fact, 2 of his children, so he has 4 grown children, and 2 of his children actually served in the military, but they were never deployed. And they're like, no, we don't feel that. No, of course, there's nothing to see here, folks, you know. And I think that it is more pronounced because of exactly what I think Julia is referencing Wendell here, that there was something that came before. This isn't just this now, that we're not just experiencing this now. There was something that came before that this is connected to in an odd way that may make no sense. But for my friend Tom, it makes perfect sense. I am disarmed in this space. I feel unsafe when I go out to go for a run. Now I'm not grabbing my gun, I'm putting on my mask, but it's the same kind of arming. So, I mean, absolutely, I think those things we get entrenched in those earlier traumas, and then they get connected to new traumas. And we're in the midst of a big new trauma for all of us that may mean different things for people who have been through past traumas. And those traumas vary. It could be war, it could be sexual abuse, it could be any number of things.
Thank you for that. Trauma is very close to our heart here. I can't see your name. I have to do a little click. Oh, I don't know your name.
It's Kirsten.
Kirsten. Thank you. And I'm blind. And then Vuyo.
I must just apologize. I do have children in the bath, and it's very hard to find a quiet spot unless I go hide in the dark, which I'm not willing to do because it's raining.
I hear you, sister.
I don't want to spend too much on the past, but what I did want to say is one of the girls on here is actually, we studied together and did our masters, and we understood a lot about the unconscious in one of our subjects. But I think, I mean, I've studied trauma for many years, and I think trauma can manifest in so many different ways, and we underestimate what defines trauma. And I'll just give you a quick example. My son cannot be left alone at school. We have to fetch him, and if we're not there on time, he starts having a panic attack. And that happened, we only learned recently. We didn't understand why. We thought this is attachment, separation issues, but it wasn't. We have a very loving family, but it happened one day. We were late to fetch him when he was about 3 years old from school. That was a single event that has had a huge impact on his life and how he perceives the reality of things. And so I think we underestimate how trauma is developed and how people experience it. My thing is, when it comes to fallback, which I've been struggling with, and this is where I bring in one of the girls on here, Christelle, the way we studied together, is that unconscious that you mentioned earlier on. We keep falling back into sort of where that unconscious manifests into our defense mechanisms, our id, is how do we, and you mentioned about tools, is how do we effectively use our tools to better ourselves and to not allow that fallback to impact us so much, because most of us go back into it. It's very hard not to. It's kind of like an automatic reaction. It's our defense. It's a memory that's deeply embedded. What tools do we use? I mean, there are things we can implement, but it's so difficult when all you're trying to do is just protect yourself. You go into this natural way of being. So my question is, how do we spring back, not from just necessarily maybe doing yoga or whatnot and breathing exercise, that treatment of treating that fallback to not be so significant or regressed, so to speak?
I think that's an excellent question. And, you know, we all want to get there. How can I feel better? How is this going to be better for me, right? And I want to tell you that I don't have I'm not going to sell you the snake oil of do these 3 things and you'll be forever cured of fallback. I don't know that we ever will be. I think that there are things that we can do that help us show up more aligned with our intentions more consistently, that allow us to experience fallback and dump a lot of the shame and blame that comes along with that. That's not very helpful. That allows us to figure out what those tools are, the scaffolds, to help us not get into that space. And when we inevitably do get into that space, help us come out of it quicker and hopefully with less damage to ourselves and to others, and to also accompany others on the journey. And I will share some of those, but if you don't mind, Kirsten, I will hold that till that's kind of later in our time together, that I'll share some of those strategies.
Thank you, Valerie. Vuyo is your next question.
Okay, and if you guys are, we'll take one more, and then if you're okay, let's move along a little bit, and then we'll stop for questions a little bit later. We might have to hold some of these to the end.
It's fine, you can hold mine. You can hold mine.
Are you sure?
Not related to anything in particular. It's just about the theory itself. So it's all good. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, great. And maybe we'll answer some of these as we go along too, just like we've unpacked unresolved trauma as a trigger at this point. We're coming up to those things. Thank you for those. I want to talk a little bit about what I'm seeing right now in this pandemic and related to fallback. And so many, I mean, I could just skip this point, but because I think in your opening stories, so many of you shared so much of what I'm going to share right now. You know, many of us are in lockdown. I think maybe all of us still, unless you live in certain areas of the United States, which are now begun to open up a little bit, but that is not my area. I think this idea of lockdown as both a way to describe our external world and our interior sense making is really helpful. I know that, like Lucille, what it feels like to me when I am in fallback is I am shrinking. I am shrinking. I am becoming smaller. My capacities are shrinking and becoming smaller. And all of this is happening right now as the world around us is shrinking and becoming smaller. Our world, our daily existence is in a smaller, more shrunk space than it was 2 months ago. Survival mode, this whole idea of safety and the real safety and looking out for the vulnerable population, looking out for the vulnerability within ourselves. But this, you know, we talk about hunkering down and circling the wagons, and in fallback, we are seizing the weapons in our psychological reach, and we often don't really pay attention to if we need to be in defense of something. We don't notice it as such. We're just in self-protective mode. And that's what these metaphors tend to reveal. And then we don't often explore what those are about for us. What really feels at risk? What do I feel like I really need to protect right now? Instead, we end up dismissing it and denying that this part of self exists. We often blame others. That's my first response in fallback. It's someone else's fault. And then I quickly come to being ashamed of myself. So the shrinking happens, fallback happens all the time when we had a normal daily lives. And now, as we're in this strange new land trying to navigate, we see it happening more than ever. And part of that is that our construction of self and the world around us has shifted, has shrunk, has become much different than we ever knew before. And we are in a state of massive uncertainty. And while this is happening, our full capacities are needed now more than ever. In our homes, with our families, from whom we likely would love to get a break, but are not getting any break, with our families outside our home who we're trying to figure out how to support from afar but feel unable to help, with our teams and the organizations that we lead within, with the constituents that we serve within the organizations that we're trying to determine the best path for people and wanting to actually remove ourselves completely from the decision making. I heard that. And as we try to nurture a potential that may exist beyond now in a space that we've never known before, these are calling on our highest capacities to come forth at a time when we are having a really hard time bringing our better selves. But if we can understand fallback, we can begin to understand when and why we are not able to bring our best selves. We're able to start to reframe our expectations for who we are in this world, to know that we are not this one consistent center of gravity ideal self that shows up. We can accept the full messiness that is an inevitable component of being human. We're able to come to love and know a more authentic version of self. And then we're also able to cultivate the environments for other people to do the same. So understanding fallback allows us to recognize the fluidity and the multidimensionality of self and the influence of context, which we're living right now in terms of place and time, and others in their own experience of development and their own experience of fallback on who we're able to bring to the table. And it's super hard to do those things now. And this is why we need to be aware. Yeah, Julia.
I'm a bit of a gas bag, but what I really want to say is a lot of our coaching training leaves out the context. And focuses on the intra-psychic dynamics of the person, that somehow their ability to get through the world relates to their personality and has very little to do with the context. And what I love about Leadership Fallback is that it really brings in a much more mature perspective. And it says the context is probably most of what happens. And I just wanted to underscore that because I just love that point.
Yeah, context matters hugely. You know, we just think about how you show up in different places, how you feel like you are able to show up in different places. You're still the same self, but you can't bring the fullness of yourself to these different places. So, I mean, I love that you pointed that out. I had a professor in my doc program who always said, context matters. And so it doesn't feel foreign to me. I mean, it just feels like, of course, context matters. And that's what the constructive developmentalists say too. You know, we construct our meaning with and from the context that we live in. We are not these isolated beings in a vacuum. We are interacting with our world and being shaped by and shaping it.
Yeah, so Diane Ring says, in managing fallback, how useful is it to make use of trying to figure out what stage we've fallen back to?
I think that it can be useful when you have that knowledge and those tools, and I don't think it's necessary. I don't think you have to have that to know. I just think it gives you a little bit more, you know, it kind of gives you a picture of, oh yeah, I look like that. Like one of my fallback characters is punitive one. And for the longest time, I thought that was about expert. Okay, so maybe now, Lucille, if you can pull up the, Julia put together this, this table that shows the different developmental models, a couple of them. So Euphoria's, Torbert's, and Keegan. So you can kind of follow along here if you're more fluent in one than the others, and because I am least fluent in Euphoria's. So, and am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah.
Okay. So, so my punitive one, I totally thought was, and I'm going to use my cheat sheet here, specializing, because I am right. I know what I know, you know, you need to get it right. And then I realized after reflecting on it for some time that it was really much more toward opportunist or self-protecting. That's what it was about. Something around fairness and being included and being respected felt at risk to me when the punitive one came out. So the fact that I had kind of a sense of what the different stages looked like and could kind of spend more time noodling them because I had that nuance, I think was helpful to me, but I don't think it's necessary. And so if you're talking to your clients and you are not putting the stages out there explicitly, you don't have to do that. In fact, I probably would, it's useful for me within myself. It's maybe useful for me when I talk to other people in my own making connections, but I probably am not saying, yeah, your opportunist is coming out big time right now. Okay, we can take that off for a minute. Okay, so let's see. So we talked about context as being really powerful. Okay, so let's talk about what's out there in the world right now. We are exhausted. I'm exhausted. I've got a homeschool teaching job now. I'm back in the world around here. And by the way, I'm not a homeschool teacher. Never wanted to be. I teach adults, and I do that on purpose because I am not good with children. I have children. I love them. I love them a lot. I like them too. I don't really love or like a lot of children in the world. I'll just say that, you know, I'm just gonna, adults are my thing. I'm good with adults and I know that about myself. Okay. And now I'm a homeschool teacher and I am experiencing, someone said in their check-in something about incompetence. Holy, I have so much feelings, so big feelings around incompetence in this teaching role. It is triggering a whole bunch of fallback in me at this time. That is connected to another trigger that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But so I am stressed, I'm overwhelmed, I'm exhausted. There's so much uncertainty and fear in the world, and I feel that in my own life and relationship. Illness is, you know, all around us. It's threatening all of us. And so this, just the process of living these days is exhausting. I find it like a trip to the grocery store requires so much more planning and time and emotional energy than it ever did before. We never thought about how we were going to be putting our families at risk when we came home from the grocery store before. I think about that now all the time. We are managing multiple jobs, some of which have become more prevalent now than ever before. We're homeschooling, we're potentially caring for others. We're managing anxiety, our own, our children's, which I'm realizing is much easier to do than managing our parents' anxiety because they actually have a frame of reference to the world. They have these, they've experienced traumas that this may be hearkening back to. We're managing our teams, our clients' anxieties, our customers. We're experiencing an incredible loss in terms of the amount of time that we have and our opportunities, potentially our financial livelihood, the external rewards of normal life. I'm losing like our traditions that as the months go by, the things that we did at this time, the traditions, the rites of passage go by, hopefully not unnoticed, but not in the way that we used to celebrate them before. We're experiencing loss of freedom and certainty, the loss of the illusion of control. We're experiencing loss of life and health. There's much going on in this space. What else are you guys seeing? Like, what else are you seeing out there in the world that may be connected to fallback?
I'm sorry, but I have to be stupid. But Valerie, do you think that Donald Trump's suggestions for what to do if you have COVID are an example of fallback?
No, I think he's operating. I think that's his normal meaning-making space. Yeah, I don't think that's, because once you're there, there's just not many places you can fall back to. You know, there's not much earlier.
Sorry, I'm being very cheeky. Sav
Yeah.
says fear of loss and abandonment.
Of not being enough. Oh, yeah, I feel that one.
From a leadership perspective, working with some leaders, a lot of denial that there's actually anything going on. So some just kind of clinging to the idea that, you know, it'll be all back to normal next week. Everything's going to be fine. Nothing's really happening. It's just a short little kink in the cable here, and everything will be back to normal soon. We don't have to do anything.
Pete's got some comments.
Let's see.
And Audrey.
I see. I've seen a big shift since lockdown extension. Clients could cope for 3 weeks, but now reality has forced a realization of this is real. Yeah. Forgetting all your existing capabilities, right? We're I think so many of us are in this experience of individual fallback that it feels like a collective fallback. You know, we're all in this space. We're like, what do we do? How do I even function in a way that just seemed normal before? Influencing anxiety amongst others. Conformity bias. Yeah, because we don't know. I mean, there's so much unknown in this space.
Yeah.
Let's see. Loss of faith in authority. Shame around who our authority figures are. Yeah, like serious. And this is not new. This did not come about as a result of the pandemic. We've been living with this for 3 years in the States. And that is one perspective.
Yeah,
he is obviously our president for a reason, and that's enough people felt differently.
There was an article about that American shame in something I read today. Yeah.
I don't think I have ever felt it so intensely as I have in the last 3 years. Rebellion, civilian pushback, right? These loss of freedoms and managing, you know, the individual rights and the collective. In the United States, we don't do well with collective. We don't do well with thinking beyond the individual. It's what am I having to sacrifice myself for you? Because I don't really want to sacrifice for you. I want it to be what's in it for me. So it's interesting to think about so one of the things that I think, let's talk about this, some of the triggers here. So one of we talked about unresolved trauma a little bit, and I'll just mention a couple of other things that I'm seeing around pandemic related to unresolved trauma, and then we'll go, I want to move on to the context part. So we talked about the military. You know, if you were in the military, and this is bringing up trauma from that period, economic recessions of the past, poverty, you know, fear of financial security, war, scarcity. I have a friend whose parents lived through war, and her father, who lives with her, is not taking showers because he thinks there's going to be a water shortage now. And she has an issue with that because she lives with him. But these are real fears for people born of earlier times in their lives than earlier experiences. Natural disasters. We have I live in California. We have fires all the time. We've been told to shelter in place because of fires. You know, this is triggering trauma from those times. In disadvantaged and disenfranchised populations, life. Like, this is a reminder of what life feels like for them, but on a heightened scale on the daily. The one that I wanted to talk about is this contextual gravitational pull. So this is another overarching trigger. So we have the center of gravity idea that, you know, some people refer to as your normal meaning making space. I actually refer to it as your ideal. The sun is shining, the birds are chirping, the breeze is blowing. I don't think this is where I show up all the time. I think I have to have kind of the supports around me to get there. But just as we have our own center of gravity, our capacities, so do our systems that are around us. So our relationships, our family has its own developmental center of gravity, our teams, our organizations, our countries, our cultures. So, you know, the center of gravity of our culture, our orientation is much more around individualism, and I say our being the United States, achieving, having strong knowledge, that kind of thing. And what happens, this is, you know, to Julia's point about context matters, we don't show up, I know I don't, with my full set of capacities to all of these different contexts, to all of these different systems. When I go into a system that is bigger than me developmentally, it feels like it's soccer over there or football? How do you refer to it in South Africa?
Soccer.
Okay. So it's like the new pair of soccer cleats that your child hasn't grown into yet. Like, you know, you want to get there. It's your leading edge. It expands you. It prompts your growth and learning and development. So there are the bigger contexts, the contexts that have later developmental center of gravities. And then there are the contexts that have kind of the same center of gravity, the ones that match you, that support you being exactly where you are, showing up exactly with the capacities that you have. It's like your favorite old robe that just feels super cozy and warm and comfortable. And then there are the earlier contexts, the contextual gravitational pulls, and these feel pinching and constricting. I think, if we have prom over here, is it matric, the dance? Okay. So it's like when you go to try to put on that dress that you wore to that dance 20 years earlier, and you feel completely like, get this off of me. That is pinching and hugging in places that aren't meant to be pinched and hugged anymore. And that's what our context does to us when it's smaller, and we are living in a constricted prom dress right now. Like, most of our contexts are much smaller, are pinching us, are causing us to show up in a smaller space. When we were probably already oriented that way to begin with, but this is where it's being supported. And we see that in, you know, to Sharon's point about getting off of social media and feeling so much better now. Yes, that would be lovely to be able to do. And we all can make that. I can make that choice too. Just, we have free will here. But those are the constricted spaces.
There's two comments that relate to that. From Heidi, seeing disillusionment in clients, people expressing feelings of incompetence, in how to provide assurance while being authentic about uncertainty, and keeping people motivated and energized. And from Wendell, he's looking at it from the position of organizational effectiveness, thinking about how leaders deal with their own fallback, but also those that lead, i.e. how they set a context for other people to go into leadership fallbacks.
Yeah, that's super important. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and how we need to create a safe place for exploration of fallback in an organizational context. And how do we do that when we're social distancing? Thanks, Wendell. Some questions there.
That's a lot. And I love that. I love that you brought that up, Wendell, about our responsibility to others, because it is one thing. First, I think the first thing is, if you can't recognize it in yourself, if you're not willing to acknowledge that we are not a consistent self. I do not show up consistently to everything and every person in my life. I just don't. But we often we assume that we are this enduring self that shows up like, I am this person. And when we are not showing up that way, like, oh, who are you? Like, what a strange thing that just happened out of the blue. And not a full integration of that into who we are. Yes, that too. This too is me. I am all of this. And so until we can accept that in ourselves, it's really challenging, impossible to accept that in anyone else. I mean, one of the gifts of Fallback is that one, we're able to have more compassion for ourselves. And the next step is to be able to have compassion for others. Because if I can't show up my best self, I'm not going to just write this person off because they didn't show up their best self. And I'm not just going to say, oh, that's just Bob. Bob does that. Well, maybe Bob does that when we are in this dynamic playing out these same scripts. And so how might we invite people to the conversation about what do we need? What structures, what scaffolds do we need to support us showing up our best selves, so that we can try to put those in place more consistently. And I think it's important to think about, how do we do this in the here and now, in our environment now, when we're not, are showing up in our best selves in this space looks different. So what do I need in this particular space of working from home, interacting in this way to show up my best self? And we need to give people space to not show up their best selves. So not expected of them, to love and embrace and accept that in them too, because it is in us too.
I just want to check in around time. We've got, what have we got? 18 minutes, sadly.
I know, it's gone fast. Okay, so if you don't mind, I'm going to hold off on questions, and so I can make sure I'm able to kind of get to some of this stuff. Okay, so one of I mentioned what earlier, ordinary triggers, those are kind of the stress, exhausted, rage. For me, hangry, I'm hangry, I haven't eaten, I need to, I'm low blood sugar, fear, complexity, all of these things are around us all the time. And one of the other things that I identified in my research is an overarching trigger that I'm not sure is an overarching trigger now, its own. I think it just shows up as a result of the other 4 overarching triggers, is this brain trumps mind idea. So what this is about is when we physiologically are unable to make meaning from our higher order sense making place in the brain. So when we encounter a threat, which at back in history looked like a tiger attacking us, and today looks like a pandemic, but it also may look like my kindergartner telling me that I'm mean because I've told her she needs to work on her letters. Just happened yesterday. That we experience what was a tiger threat now is something different, but we experience it as a threat. And what happens is our amygdala takes over everything. All the processing in the brain goes to the amygdala, this part in the back of our head. This is where the fight flight response is housed. And our prefrontal cortex, which is in this area where higher order sense making happens, nothing is getting to that for, I think it's something like 90 seconds. Our primitive brain trumps our cognitive mind for a period of time. So this is where the breathe comes in. Can I take a break for 90 seconds? You have to say for that, I need a moment. I often say I need a moment. I need a moment and a half doesn't really roll off the tongue. So, but if you can get past that 90 seconds, then you can start to allow your mind to access its higher order sense making. There's this guy who's a brain scientist. His name is David Rock. Some of you may have encountered his work. He has this model called SCARF, and it's SCARF with each letter standing for a specific threat area. And so those are around status, certainty, autonomy, freedom, relationships, and fairness. So if something feels like a threat from one of those areas, the amygdala kicks in and we are no longer able to make sense from that higher order meaning making. So Heidi Carter, thank you for offering questions in advance. She asked about what is the relationship between levels of anxiety, defense mechanisms, and leadership fallback. And while I haven't studied that that specifically, the correlation between the three explicitly, I can tell you that it made me think about the SCARF model, and that and these challenges to the mind being able to function when the primitive brain takes over. So I think that anxiety may be produced by any of these triggers that I've identified. And when we are in fallback, we tend to be protecting something in self that feels at risk. And we're not always clear that that is happening. So we experience this as an anxiety. Our defense mechanisms come up. We're hunkering down. We're circling the wagons to protect ourselves. And that is not in alignment with our higher order sense making. So my sense of this is anxiety goes up, defense mechanisms come out, we're in self-protective mode, and that's often showing up in a smaller space than we're normally ideally capable. Any questions about the overarching triggers before I go on and just talk a little bit about, I want to talk about Ashley Wells' research, because she studied, fairness as one of the SCARF triggers. She studied leadership, fallback in leaders, and I know this is particularly important to you guys. Okay. Okay, so, and this might be a good place, Lucille, for the model to come back up again too, so you can just kind of compare. I also want to thank Heidi again because she said, what are the signals of fallback? And what I take that to mean is, what does fallback look like? And I will just say it looks different in each of us. Our triggers are so individual. How I show up in fallback may be very different from how Heidi shows up, or Julia, or Lucille. We all have a different way of showing up. But some of the things, she studied 8 participants who were in leadership roles, one who was in the socialized form of mind, one who was on socialized self-authoring, kind of on the cusp there between the two, 4 who were self-authoring, and 2 who were on the cusp between self-authoring and self-transforming. And she found that when someone in stage 4, so the self-authoring form of mind, was eclipsed by feelings of stress or uncertainty or overwhelm, and I hear this in your questions, they enacted their independence in a more autocratic way than usual, which had a subsequent impact of holding back the organization or the employees who felt left behind or unable to share their voices. She talked about how those who normally can make meaning from a self-authoring form of mind will retreat into a socialized space. So in third order, there you go. Thank you, Julia, for making notes there. Where they're subject to the external approvals of others. They're looking for an external validation of their skills and starting to retreat to feelings of self-doubt. They begin to second guess their own abilities and skills and start to question their worthiness, actually thinking, am I in the right job? Is this the right job for me? Because I don't think I'm capable. And I tell you what, I feel like that in many areas of my life right now. Like, this may not be the right job for me right now, and I don't have any other options. Like, this is it. We all have to do these jobs that we're forced to do right now. Holding tight to particular ways of constructing meaning in a way that was restrictive to forward thinking and perspective taking. So normally they would be able to think forward and to take in complexity, but now they're holding tight to what they knew, or maybe this is the denial that anything has changed, because it was almost in a defiant way. Like, I'm defiantly claiming that this is my way of making sense of the world, and the world may have changed around me, but I am right. That they were beholden to a strong sense of purpose or mission or a way of doing things in response to stress or overwhelm or time-limiting factors. We're feeling like the urgency of things now, and not able to open up to the forward thinking that might have been necessary to move a situation forward. Again, this was someone in the self-authored space who had potential before to make sense in a broader way, and in these moments just were not able to open up to those. She had someone who really was focused on the technical fix to adaptive problems. I mean, we got a big old adaptive problem right now, and the little technical fixes that we're trying to put in place are not going to work. So in her study, they were unable to respond with adaptability and nimbleness to complexity. What this looked like was losing one's temper in the absence of a technical fix, closing off of self and perspective taking, so limiting the options that were available. They had moments of anxiety in which the reaction to find a fix for the situation was so prevalent before they could even realize that there were many more options for agility and nimbleness if they were to just take a step back. And so here's where fallback may be useful too, that, you know, when we're in that fallback space, we can kind of take some time to gather some of the basic tools in order to prepare ourselves to then move forward and to bring in the complexity of a situation. She had someone say to a team, "I just don't understand why this is so difficult for you." And then of course was ashamed to have said that to them. And I just think right now during this pandemic, taking on multiple perspectives and multiple realities is so overwhelming because there are so many varying repercussions for so many different people. I mean, how do you decide? I think about the leaders that you all have mentioned in your comments, what to prioritize. Do we prioritize lives or livelihoods? We are in the midst of a shared experience, yet we are each having our individual experiences of it. We are not having the same experience, even though we are part of the shared experience. We have families with children or adults only. We have the healthy and the vulnerable. We have financial security and insecurity. We're measuring space and confinement. I mean, it's so hard to know what the right thing is to do right now. And she saw in her participants that didn't know what the right thing to do was at the moment, that it was made even harder by their desire to be seen as doing the right thing. So how many of us are working with individuals right now who just want so badly to be seen as doing the right thing? And this is tied to our thoughts about identity and perfectionism and carrying the weight of others' expectations at a time when they're crippling the weight of others' expectations. So fears of having things not going well at this time are being equated to leaders' self-perception of their capacities, but also their perception of how other people are seeing their capacities. And then, as you've mentioned too here, through your comments, the uncertainty and ambiguity that we are just living daily from moment to moment often leads to self-protection and a safety orientation. And in me, this manifests as feeling of a grasping for control. Okay, I want to take a moment here. I know we're coming up close on moments, but anything that we need to address from the chat box real quick before we talk about what we might do about this?
There's a lot of chatting about scarf.
Scarf.
Yeah.
Scarf is interesting. I can send you, if you all don't have, if you're not familiar with it, I can send through Julia a couple of articles that might be helpful to you.
Simon, Ingrid shared a bit and Simon shared a bit. So we've got some references, but I'm sure more references would be incredibly useful.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's basically what's been happening in the chat box. A lot of discussion around scarf.
Thank you. It really is fascinating to think about how physiologically we just don't have capacities for a period of time.
Yeah.
Ashley Wells research, I can send you a link to that too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would be great. We don't have that. Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about, so what do we do about it? Like what are our tools? What are our options? I see myself showing up, a smaller version of myself. Going back to our original write-up in the beginning, like all those feelings that we had when we look back at the screen of ourselves in this time and these feelings of shame and all that. What do I do about that? So the first thing, we've talked about this already during our time, is to recognize that we are not consistent in the way we show up in the world. We need to get to know our full cast of characters. I am not this version of self all the time. I have many other characters. I mentioned Punitive One. I have Chicken Little. I have Pete the Cat. I have many, many characters. And when we can get to know our characters, we can begin to claim the fullness of ourselves, and we can allow other people to claim the fullness of themselves. And when we claim all of our characters, they start to begin to loosen their grip on us. So when we can identify, and we often seek to deny when this, I've mentioned this before, like, oh, who are you? Like, who is this strange person who showed up in my life as me and is not me? Yes, that too is you. That's you too. So can we embrace these characters, get to know them, recognize that we are made up of a multitude of characters that comprise a full cast. And then once we realize that we have this full cast of characters, and it actually kind of gives us some options, we can notice when our storyline is derailed. So and this helps us when we are in fallback. When we know that we have certain fallback characters and we see them coming on the scene, it gives us a hint that maybe our intentions are not going to be met with this particular character. And so this brings up the importance of actually knowing what your intentions are. And I think we don't often spend enough time figuring that out, even connecting to that. But to know, like, what is my purpose here? What is my greatest hope, my goal, my desired outcome in this particular situation, in this relationship, during this time of pandemic? And once we are clear about what those are, we can begin to notice the gap between how we are showing up and what our intentions for doing so are. So it's in this gap that we're able to start to notice when our storyline has gone off in a direction that we really do not want it to go. Trauma has come up a lot during our time together, and this next step, explore your origin story. The origin story of your character can be super helpful for figuring out, where did this character come from? What is this about for me? And you can do this yourself by further exploring the experience of fallback that you identified earlier in our call at the beginning. But to get a sense of when these characters have been prominent, what settings, what people, what situations, and to be honest with ourselves about how the characters tend to take their form, what tends to beckon these forward. And a great question to ask is, what feels at risk for me in these moments? Because our fallback characters, when we are in fallback, we are protecting something that we value, but we hardly ever articulate it that way. But what is up for me? What feels at risk to me? Is it fairness? Is it my sense of fairness or respect? So tapping into that allows us, into our origin story, allows us to figure out where and when they were formed, the scenes in which they seem prominent, so we know when they might show up again. It allows us to find the depth in these characters and to determine what the deepest motivations and fears and hopes are in those. Another step in this process in recovery from fallback is to know when to rewrite the scene or to ditch the script altogether. We have a way of showing up to our lives that is based on normal life. And we are not living a normal life right now. Our lives are completely unnormal, strange, unknown, unnavigable. And so here is the time for us to perhaps shift our expectations of what happens in these scenes and shift the script, adjust the script to allow us to fit better into our current context, to have more success. We need to be able to set ourselves up for success, and that means that we're going to have to make different choices. I know that I don't do well when my children interrupt me when I'm working on a project. So if maybe I need to get up at 5 a.m. before they get up so I have a chance to work on things, so I am not impatient with them. The flip side of that is, if I don't get enough sleep, I am not going to be a very good homeschool teacher. I will assure you of that. So maybe I need to be better about setting deadlines. This is to Ron's point about taking on something that committing to something with the client that just made him lose his mind for a period of time because it was too tight a deadline. So how can we be more honest with ourselves about what we can get done and honest with others and be realistic and give ourselves a little bit of grace in there. And then finally, the theater analogy that I want to bring forth is from improv, and this is the yes and we've talked a little bit about this in terms of acceptance. So you are not alone in this space. You are not the only one experiencing fallback, and that is helpful because sometimes we feel so lonely. We feel like we are the only ones not showing up our best selves. It's helpful for us to have compassion for ourselves, but again, it's helpful for us to know that there are other people orbiting in our world, and they are subject to their own gravitational pulls, their own experiences of fallback. So how might, instead of like pushing up against that part of us or pushing up against that part of them, we can accept that part of self and accept that part of others and join with those other characters within ourselves and join with those other characters within the other actors in our lives to co-create something that allows something more positive to come. And I think really key to this, I love that Ron and Margaret were on here together. I think there was another couple that was going to maybe show up. Having a partner in this, and maybe that's your partner in life, maybe it's a colleague, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a friend from grad school, but having someone that you can be fully honest and vulnerable and share the experience of your full, messy, complex self with is so incredibly important. And so I want to invite you all to think about who that might be for you and be willing to be vulnerable and go there, because it is really hard for us to make sense of our own experiences of fallback, for us to have the grace that we need for ourselves to be able to accept and to grow from this. And if you are the other person who is listening, your job is to actually meet that person, to show your own fullness, your own full, messy, complex human self too, and to join with them so that they might also bring the parts that they wish that they could deny and have it accepted and loved. Okay. We're 3 minutes past time. I have a few more sheets, but we'll just let that go. Okay. So I don't want to hold you longer. What do we need now for people for us to bring this to a close in a way that is meaningful for others? Any last comments, questions? You could also, Julia can share my information with you. I'm happy for you to reach out to me if you have questions. It seems I have 50 unread chats here that I have not looked at. Hopefully Julia's kept us going on here, but I know she couldn't have on all of them.
Yeah, I think a lot of them were people saying I've really benefited from the session and I need to go off now.
Okay.
And a lot of thanks and delight and meaning making out of what people have said. I wonder if we can I'll try and cut and paste it for you and send it to you.
It's all recorded. It's all recorded already, Julia. Don't worry. It's part of the recording.
Thanks.
Valerie. So, first of all, thank you so much for this theory. There's something about it that that's very different to typical psychotheory. And it feels like a psychological theory of some kind, but it's not like the traditional theories. And I love how it accommodates non-mainstream life, right? In that it is not sitting in binary form. It's also not sitting in the linear forms of what traditional psychology seems to be all about, right? And I also love that it accommodates context, because that's how you enrich that space. So you get to understand what is this non-mainstream reality that other people are coming from. And so my question about it is, I mean, I've spent a lot of time with clients who are millennials during this time, which we are all experiencing as fallback time, right? In the main. And a lot of them have been saying this is actually fall forward time for them, right? So I've just been wondering how the theory accommodates that, how it accommodates the possibility, because it's so unidirectional. Does it also accommodate the possibility of us not only falling back to an earlier center of gravity, but falling forward to one that we have no grasp of? And I have people who are saying, I feel like I am existing in a frame 10 years from now. It's an opportunity I would never have otherwise. So I'm loving this time and it's working for me. And in the same sense, they're able to link it to perhaps a childhood experience, which would have done the same thing for them, put them on fast forward, particularly African millennials that I'm working with, who were in child-headed households and had to leave those households and find a new center of gravity from nowhere to live in a more mature phase of their existence, right? So I'm just wondering how the theory, I'm just throwing all of that in there, and I don't know how you make sense of it, but I just loved how the theory opened up the possibility of looking at that as well as part of a developmental progression. Yeah.
Thank you, Vuyo. I just, is it Vuyo?
Vuyo. Yeah.
Lovely. I want to answer that question. I just want to say, because I know we are past time, that if you have to go, I will not be offended at all. And I hope I should check in with Julia and Lucille and Simon and just make sure, are you okay still continuing to host us for a few more minutes?
Absolutely. I'm sort of also having the idea that maybe we should have another discussion later at another time.
No, I mean, I'd love to just have one where I field questions for sure, because these are such great, rich questions. For everyone else, I just want to say thank you. What a pleasure it has been being here with you all. And I'm grateful for your showing up for this extended period of time and hanging with me throughout all of this, and for your excellent questions and your willingness to offer yourselves. Thank you so much. And please do feel free to reach out if you have any questions or need anything else. So to Vuyo's question, spring forward is a necessary component of fallback in my articulation of it. That can be challenged, but in my articulation of it, it is there. I wonder if your clients are actually experiencing fallback that calls them to spring forward, or they're just experiencing this time as something that is prompting growth and opportunity. So
it's more the latter.
Okay. So, so I haven't studied that specifically, but we do know, I mean, in terms of challenges to identity as an overarching trigger, one of the interesting things about that is that sometimes the things that the challenges to our identity that are thought of as really beautiful things, like becoming a parent or taking on a new job or a role, they challenge our way of seeing ourselves and our way of being seen, the way we're accustomed to being seen as, and they can be super rich and beautiful and joyous. And they can be super hard. I mean, they can throw us into fallback. Those things too can throw us into fallback. And I think similarly, there are, whether it's a challenge to identity or a shift in the way the world works, and there are opportunities for us to, sometimes we experience things that might feel constrictive to a lot of us, but especially if it's a group that has already felt constricted, perhaps the shifting of the reality opens up space for movement that didn't exist in the prior system. I'm just thinking through that. I don't actually have I've done no research in this area at all, but like there's just the dynamics move, and certainly in ways that privileged some of us before that we may not be feeling so privileged in this new context. Maybe it did open up space for many others who felt very disenfranchised before, to have a new opportunity, to have a new potential to enter the space. I mean, in some ways, I feel this way around, you know, having gone into my cocoon and being content to stay there for a period of time, and then having been invited back out into the world in this way. It is because of this particular time in our reality that this is particularly relevant. And so it is a beautiful new opportunity for me. And for us, I think, to really focus in on something that does not feel like it's a good thing, but I actually think that there are so many gifts in Fallback. If we're able to recognize it and to reflect on it and to grow through it, to learn how to accept self, to learn how to accept others, and to create those spaces for ourselves and for others, to show up in our fullness. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any any last minute questions? Sorry, I had to go and put the pizza oven on. That child is getting hungry and trashing the house.
Hangry, I get it.
Sorry, I had to drop out. Something happened at home, but just an observation. In change, one of the first steps to change is pattern interrupt. You know, whatever you're doing, if you keep doing it, it's very hard to make a change. And sometimes you've got to stop the old pattern. So I'm just noting that in this context.
Yeah.
That feels right to me.
Yeah. In stuckness, it's the interruption, which is actually an incubation, which I think it is in Fallback.
So when people are stuck, when the leaders that you've studied are stuck, that's an incubation period for them. So it's not continuing to do the same thing. They're stuck in this particular space.
Yeah. Sometimes I wonder if it's like an energy, let's just go on a low energy, because actually we're processing other stuff. Like, I don't really know how to explain it. I'm sure there'll be a technical term, but sometimes when I play spider solitaire, I know that one half of my brain is on go slow, but the rest is really processing something very big. And I suspect it might be something like that.
I mean, just in the moments of Fallback, you know, you have your go-to reaction. And when you recognize this, when you see your character, you know your characters, and you know they're going to show up. And well, you don't know they're going to show up. They come on stage, and you're like, you're supposed to be locked backstage. How'd you get out here? But you're familiar with them, and you're like, okay, here it comes. Here it comes, and here's how the script normally goes. And so, what you're making me think of, Ron, with the change is. And often for me, it's like, breathe. So instead of react, instead of yell, instead of saying these things, take a breath. And that interruption sometimes works and sometimes not so much. Maybe then it's like, breathe again, breathe again. Like, keep working on it until you're, you know, to the point where you're not just doing that reflex response. So a lot of this is around, I mean, it's going to feel like crap because you're going to notice it a lot more. You're going to notice when you show up inconsistently, when you show up not aligned with your intentions, a lot more. This is not a fun journey. I am going to just be honest with you. And you're going to think, I do this so much. And it's because you're noticing it, you know, you're not doing it more than you did before, you're noticing it and more often. And so the thing is, what you can do is you can interrupt it sooner. You can stop it sooner. Maybe you don't get all the way down the line. Maybe you can pull yourself back. Maybe, and I think about that, my children are a huge trigger for me to go into Fallback. And they are also the number one reason why I want to be bigger, why I want to grow and be the best person I can be. So they are both simultaneously. And I often, with them, I fall back, and part of it, part of the gifts, which does not feel like a gift to me, I think for them at the time, but the gift is that I acknowledge. And so with our children, with our teams, with our clients, with our spouse, acknowledging that we have fallen back, that this is not me meeting my intentions, but this is a part of me. And if we can articulate what it is, what felt threatened in those moments, then, when we're able to articulate that within ourselves, and because we usually don't even think about that. When I'm punitive one, I'm not thinking, oh my gosh, in this moment, I feel my sense of fairness is being threatened. Like in that moment, that is not my thought. But if I know that when this character shows up, it's usually because my sense of fairness feels threatened, then I can come up with a different script for communicating that than the one I normally employ. And so I can explain that in a different way that does not do the harm to the relationship and to the self and to the other. So if I can go back then to my children and say, I did not intend to treat you this way. I love you. I am proud of you. I am all these things. And this is what it was about for me. This is what was up for me. And I am sorry. And I think that offers a real opportunity to model, they're going to be in fallback too. And they're going to grow up and they're going to carry the crap that we've loaded into them, just like I carry the crap that my parents have loaded into me. And it gives them tools to be able to kind of make sense of that as well. This is what I'm telling myself, right? It makes me feel better about it. But truly, I mean, there's the Winnicott, I think it is, has the good enough parenting theory around it. And for me, I'm a perfectionist, so this is really a hard, good enough anything is super hard for me. But the idea around good enough parenting is if you believe that your parents never screw up, and if you also believe that things are always going to be perfect and you're never going to have to deal with adversity or hardship or anything, then that's not really going to prepare you very well going out into the world. So, the parents that don't show up great actually instill resilience and tools, coping skills and that kind of thing, and set expectations for what the rest of the world is really going to be like.
Beautiful. On a sort of a last note, I have to read you what Ingrid Hurwitz wrote. She says, yeah, the punitive one would get on well with my ice queen.
I love it.
And so maybe we should end on that note. There are a number of requests for you to come back, and maybe we can chat about that at another time. I really would suggest you have a look at the beautiful comments from people who've really, really taken your message home and enjoyed what you've said. One of the ones I love is Martha was just saying how generative your language is. And I think that's just a really good way to describe how this conversation has been for all of us. It's really got us going and generated so much thought. So enriching, but I really encourage you to look at that.
I sure will.
And so you're going to mail me
scarf.
We've got scarf. If you've got any more scarf, that would be great. And Ashley Wells, and we will mail back to you any comments that we get after the session.
Thank you.
And any questions, and look at who's keen for a follow-up session, or if you are. Let's see.
That'd be great. This was beautiful. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for hanging in. My goodness. You're really gluttons. No, I am so grateful.
Thank you.